Okay, welcome to the April 2026 Tri-County Electric Cooperative Board Meeting. My name is Summer Portwood. I'm the board chair. With the fiscal year closing March 31st, we'll be reviewing results and continuing the work ahead. Thank you for your participation. And the first order of business is the consent agenda. Do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second.
And all those in favor? Aye. So motion carries 4-0. Next item is large load planning.
Thank you very much. So the next item is a brief informational update on large load planning. In the coming years, you're going to be hearing more and more about what they'll call, refer to as hyperscale data centers, artificial intelligence, or computing loads across Texas and really across the nation for that matter. We're not seeing that activity yet in our service territory, not today, but before it begins to show up, I want to share with the board what we're seeing in context from utilities across ERCOT as well as across the nation and how these projects will be evaluated when or if they do approach us. And to be clear, this is not just a Texas issue, although Texas is seeing a lot of activity here. Last week, I heard from the American Association of Large Distribution Cooperatives, ALDC, and they're planning to spend some time on this topic this summer or later this year in their annual meeting, which will be here in Texas, and I'll be able to drive to some of that. But that's on the agenda for other cooperatives, large cooperatives like us across the nation, because a lot of cooperatives are dealing with this. And as we get into this topic, you're going to see a lot of cooperatives are dealing with this for geography reasons, which we'll get to. So it's not just a Texas issue. It's not even just a cooperative issue. But before we dig into the topic, the first thing I want to talk about is the key takeaway. Many of these proposals for large data centers are speculative. They're not real, at least not real yet. Their potential is speculative. And so our goal, you're going to see throughout this process and the next agenda item, is to protect our members from the financial risk that comes from something so large, potentially suddenly showing up on our system. So here's kind of a table of contents of what we're going to talk about in the next few minutes. Each one of these bullet points represents the following slides, but I covered each one of these in more detail in your monthly report from me, just to give you some context to get ready for this discussion. So I'm going to walk you through how utilities across ERCOT, which represents most of Texas, are dealing with these large load potentials, if you will, or large load requests. But then we're going to land the plane and we're going to slow down and close with how management recommends that we will handle this if one or more of them wants to come here, okay? And again, with the goal of protecting our members from financial investments getting strained. So let's start with some context. How big is the ocean we're talking about here? Today, if you go out on the hottest day of the year, demand across ERCOT will be about 85 gigawatts. Today, as we speak, there are over 230 gigawatts of requested projects, inquiries. It's 2.5 to 3 times the size of our peak demand for everything for electricity. Data centers and large loads like that, AI computing loads, are 2.5 to 3 times currently. The main point I want to leave you with here is most of them are never going to be built. Most of them will never materialize. But just the fact that they're that large has fundamentally changed the way utilities, cooperatives, municipals, investor-owns approach large loads. Just the volume has changed the way across the nation these have been approached. So starting back here with the Texas legislature in 2025, I want to go back a year before that. In 2024, in the summer, Tri-County stopped subsidizing private businesses. We stopped and said, hey, every developer, every new member has to pay their own way because it was what was right for the membership. It was just good business, okay? Then in 2025, the state of Texas followed, made it a law. Senate Bill 6, adopted in 2025. The intent of the law is very simple and it's very clear. It's to ensure that these large data centers, large loads, they participate in formal planning processes, engineering studies to evaluate the impacts on the transmission and distribution grid. And it is very specific about this. It ensures that they pay their own way, just like we've been doing since 2024. So this is not new for us. We've been doing this for a few years, But because of the scale and the size and the potential of these large loads and how much cost that could bring, it's good to know that we're going to be consistent with the state law. This applies to very large loads. I think it's above 75 megawatts. We, in our proposal, at the end, you're going to see are applying the same logic all the way from 2 megawatts and up. The practical implication is that utilities now not only have the authority to require these new loads to pay their own way, we have the obligation to make sure that they pay their own way, all the way from the studies and application, all the way through the infrastructure and all the other ongoing risks. They have to pay their own way. There's no free subsidization going on there. What you'll see often in investor-owned utilities is these data centers like to go, in many cases, to investor-owned utilities across the nation, as well as here in Texas, because these investor-owned utilities typically represent large and mega cities where there's a high demand and there's some synergy with potential for data centers. So that's one of the things they like there, as well as the potential or the appearance of a streamlined process to get their energy, transmission, and distribution all in place. Unfortunately, that's not realistic with the geography of the US. Those large cities have large resources and large demands and large populations to offer, but what they typically don't have is large amounts of unused land to build the data centers, which are usually located in the local friendly rural cooperatives. So as cooperatives like us, large cooperatives, typically near a major city in particular, we become very attractive to many of these data center types that are shopping, admittedly shopping. So it's not just here in ERCOT, it's not just here in Texas. We're seeing this across the nation. Cooperatives are getting flooded with data center potential requests, speculative. You don't know how many of them are going to be real, but some number are going to be real, and just the size alone has got to impact what we're doing so that we make sure we don't strand many, many dollars on assets that don't get materialized. So let's talk about transmission and infrastructure risk. A single hyperscale or large load campus or location, a single data center, AI computing load, could be hundreds of megawatts. And that sounds like a lot, and it is. We're one of the top 15 co-ops by size in the nation. Our peak load on a hot summer day is going to be about 1,000 megawatts, okay? That's large, that's a lot. And it required 80-something years of history of building substations and distribution facilities to serve that load. When you look at something coming in hundreds of megawatts, it could potentially grow by 50% or more within a couple of years. It's a significant capital investment. It requires many, many millions, tens, dozens of millions of dollars or more for the transmission, distribution, substation infrastructure. So before they ever consume a single kilowatt hour, you could easily be talking up to $100 million, depending on the size, location, and some other complexities. A lot of money, especially for a cooperative, is trying to do everything to govern and protect the interest of its members. So because these parts often require 2 years or more just to order, like if there's a certain type of substation transformer we want, if I place an order tomorrow and get in the queue, many of them will not be here for 2 years. And when you look at a campus of hundreds of megawatts, you could be talking several of very large ones for something scalable like this. So we're talking a lot of time and a lot of money. And we certainly are going to structure this in a way that does not risk our members financially being on the hook for significant millions of dollars of capital infrastructure. So you're going to see our proposed solution requires them paying for this up front. But I wanted to kind of give a little context of why that is. This would blow any work plan we have out of the water just by the economies of scale and adding enough zeros to the end of any number we're used to seeing. So if a project ultimately does not materialize and a utility has gone through these processes and got in line and started ordering these expensive parts, say they go out of business, or the data center doesn't build, or they decide to locate somewhere else, or whatever happens, that utility can be on the hook. And we have learned from some of our lenders of utilities that have been on the hook and gone under or next to under because they didn't have what we're about to put in place. So we're doing this, and I know it sounds very serious, and it is, and I don't want to take the enthusiasm out of it, but I want to be very clear of our intent is to guard the membership from something like that bad happening. And we'll do that by them paying for their infrastructure up front so that our membership is not at risk. So I mentioned earlier that most or many of those projects will never really materialize, and that's true, but let me give you some more tangible aspects of that. Utilities across ERCOT are reporting seeing numerous inquiries from developers that, in many cases, they're not sincere yet. They're not legitimate yet. They could be, they could become. I'll give you an example of one that called us not too long ago. Very much of a hurry, got to hurry up. This is the size, this is the date, they need it real quick, this, all these things. So our team began to work and kind of ask the questions to figure it out. As it come to pass, this particular developer didn't even know where the land was supposed to be. They not only did not own the land, they didn't own a legitimate call option on the land to secure that they had the right to purchase the land. They didn't know if it was north or south of the interstate. Okay, now that's not our business, but we can't move a substation, obviously, and just drop it where it needs to be. It takes years to plan, get easements, all these things, right? Not only to order the parts, to acquire the legal right to build out from there. And so I'm giving you a little picture here of they've got to be able to control the land. The next big thing for all of them, because of the size of these things, and they're talking hundreds of millions and billions of dollars in some cases, they've got to have approved financing. This can't be two guys in a van down by the river. This has got to be legitimately backed up by a good faith bank or venture capitalist, a hedge fund, something, an intent to lend. They need a confirmed tenant. Otherwise, it's speculative. It's not up to us. We don't care, but we don't get caught on the hook with our members facing hundreds of millions of dollars of infrastructure we can't use if not for them. So in other cases, these developers will go in and submit applications or fill out applications in different locations at different utilities. Not only in the same utility, hey, I want to be over here in this part of your system and that part of your system. They go to 3 or 4 other utilities down the street on the other side of the complex, on the other side of DFW, in another part of the state and in other states. The really good developers hire a consultant. Y'all know what that consultant does, just like any other consultant. They will go across the nation and they will compete one city and county against another one in another state for taxes, tax breaks, abatement, all sorts of things. A part of which is utilities, part of which is electricity. It's an important process to them, but it's not the only one. So they're weighing all the pros and cons to weigh out who is the ultimate winner. They may have a half a dozen applications in, and they'll recover that money by squeezing the winning location enough to offset it. So this is a real process. It happens, and it's an industry of people that represent us. So we have to be very careful in our process, understanding what we've got and what we don't. So as a result of this type of activity, utilities are now requiring, in most cases, developers to demonstrate site control, financing, and all these things before engineering studies begin. If I can pause on that, just think about engineering studies. That doesn't sound expensive necessarily, but when you roll back the tape and look underneath what's going on here, we had just the right size engineering team for our distribution cooperative. In a steady state, we were adequately staffed. When a large load like this comes along and they want to go quickly, because of the scale, it's going to consume all the resources we have. And even if we can devote it to that, we don't have enough to do our regular business. We're members of regular growth in parts of our system. These studies are expensive. They're not free. It can take hundreds of hours of time in addition to cash out the door. So there's a lot of things going on here we're trying to protect our membership from so that our members don't get caught holding the bag for these developers or consultants. So finally, this is where I'm going to land the plane on this aspect of it. For months, we've been evaluating what I'm going to call an appropriate intake model would be. If one or more of these wants to come to Tri-County Electric and we intake that load, what does it look like? If a large load request begins to materialize here that looks legitimate, how will we know it's legitimate? How will we know it's safe to spend member money and time and resources that could be used doing other things? How do we know when that's safe and appropriate? So we've looked across ERCOT, we've looked nationally at utilities that are also implementing structured processes that require developers to demonstrate site control, funding, and a willingness to fund their own way upfront. Studies, engineering studies, legal expenses, everything from the beginning. Because at the end of the day, their word's great, but if they're not willing to put money where their word is, somebody else is on the hook. That's a position we're not going to put the membership in. The objective is straightforward, and our motive is very sincere here. We're going to do two things at the same time with equal intensity. We're going to welcome legitimate developers and legitimate opportunities. As long as they come through the same process, are willing to fund their own way, we're going to be extremely helpful and roll out a red carpet for them that they pay for. And we're going to protect members that if any of those developers change their mind along the way, they go out of business, they get bought out, they decide to go to another location, whatever their decisions are, we're going to do everything in a way that protects our membership from that big financial implication. The size of these loads is so big that once you get started on this, if they go away, we're not going to need that capacity in that location. I mean, that capacity was built for that purpose. It's never going to be used. So we're not going to put our membership in a situation for that. So based on all of that, we've developed an intake model that I'm going to show you in just a moment. It goes through the same structure. It has the 4 basic components, and I think they've all got to work together to have the synergy you need to make sure you're protecting membership. Number 1 is going to be a formal request process. Think of that as an application. We'll call that first base. Second is a reimbursable engineering legal study agreements. That's the money for the time, the thought, the study, the staff time, the consulting fees, whatever that is. Third is going to be construction funding requirements, and that's the upfront cost to build everything, to order the parts, equipment, stuff. That's so members don't get caught holding the financial bag up front. Then the fourth is going to be the ongoing electric service agreement that protects the membership down the road from future financial risk, from energy supply and transmission expense and other things. So that protects the membership up front and ongoing. We're going to look at those 4 documents individually, but also together as a collection, a system that protects our membership. Any one of them does some good things, 2 of them do more good things, but when you put all 4 together, you get a very effective chance to protect the membership, even if one of these large loads comes and eventually goes away. So we'll talk about that. If you guys are ready, I'm happy to jump into that now and kind of show you our version of these 4 aspects of it. Does that make sense? Good with that? Okay. So at Tri-County, we've looked across the nation and we've studied other utilities that put in these guardrails. I'm going to call them guardrails for a moment, but there are 4 of them, and I cannot resist the baseball analogy. But I want to encourage you to look at these as a system of all 4 and how they work together. We're going to go one at a time. I know these were in your board packet earlier, so I'm not going to reread all of those many pages, but I'm going to highlight what each one does and what the intent is as we go one at a time, okay? So the first one is what I'm going to call the front door. It's first base. That's the electric service request. This is basically both parties getting to know each other, declare your information up front. Who you are, where you're going, how much of a load it is, your desired location, load requirements, things called ramps, other things of that nature. That's basically sharing information. Information is free, right? Let's make sure we're talking to the right people. Maybe they don't even need to be talking to us. This is the lowest hurdle they can clear in good faith, and let us help them make sure they're in the right spot, talking to the right people. And if it's not us, then who it is. And we have had one thinking they're talking to another utility and it was another. We're able to help connect them to the right place. So we're going to be helpful. But that's the front door, who you are, how big is it, when is it coming? It answers those journalistic types of questions, who, what, when, where, to what extent, sort of thing. Second base, the next level, the next guardrail, if you will, is the reimbursable services agreement. What that does is it takes all the information disclosed in step 1, says, okay, based on that, clearly we need something that's scarce that you don't have enough of. You've got to go do studies. There's legal expenses, there's engineering, consulting fees, etc. Models have to be built and maintained, enhanced. The reimbursable services agreement, and another synonym phrase for that is no free work. There can't be free work because it costs the membership something, right? It costs our engineers and our attorneys, so they're doing work for the membership. No free work. So before we perform any of those studies, the developer has to fund that work. And as that fund is depleted, as more and more studies happen, and the reason more and more studies would happen is if they change their mind during the process. It happens. It happens a lot. It's fine. It's almost like an architect building a building. You're probably welcome to change it, but at some point they're gonna need more money for the time, right? It's the same concept here. If they nail it on the first time, there probably will not be a lot of replenishing this. But if it's willy-nilly bouncing all over the place, consulting fees cost time. So this replenishes that, and it makes sure that even if they stop and put their pens down, whatever they've exhausted, the membership is not paying for because they have paid us up front in a reimbursable services agreement that was in your board packet. As it gets low towards the bottom, they've got to fill it up, or we stop and put our pens down. And that's what protects the membership to this point at phase 2, second base. Now let's transition around the corner to third base. All right, we're coming in the home stretch here. Now you're getting into construction. If you've agreed on all the journalistic questions, where and all these things, and both parties understand the cost estimates that have been provided, if the developer says, yes, go build it, they've got to pay for it up front, just like we've been doing since 2024 in the summer. They got to pay this up front for the cost to build the substation or whatever it is, the feeders, all the other infrastructure. This is what protects the membership from the first humongous cash flow. When you're talking numbers of 2 or 3 commas in there, this would be a significant amount of cash flow to protect the membership from. So before we build anything and before we order anything, this has to be paid up front. And that brings us down to the fourth guardrail. The fourth way to protect the membership. So far, we protect the membership from upfront cost, but if that's been built well, we still have ongoing risk. And so to protect them from that, we've got what we call the electric service agreement. This stops any long-term risk, because you had upfront risk, now long-term risk. And ultimately, this is where a lot of the money can be tied up. So let's be candid. If you're building $1 billion, many hundreds of $1 million data center, you're going to be concerned about upfront cost. And you're going to be concerned about ongoing energy and transmission cost. That part right there requires a long-term contract. Their lenders are going to want to see that contract. They're going to see some details of that contract. They will sign the appropriate terms, NDAs, and all those things. That's where a lot of co-ops, that's where some cooperatives have gotten into trouble, is in this phase of risk right here. So if we get to stage 4, ours will be structured in such a way that they bear all of that risk. And it's primarily 2 areas. It's increased transmission expense that they would cause the cooperative. And it's the energy portion that would have to go out and procure on their behalf. Both portions have to be cleanly theirs and not the membership's. So when you go back and look at all 4 of these pieces and you put them together, it addresses risk from upfront, study, scope creep, time, consulting fees, staff time, construction, purchasing materials, installing materials, all of that time and money, and the ongoing transmission and energy risk and power supply, upfront and long term. If you take all 4 together, you've got a framework here that allows any legitimate developer to come in, get the information they need, commensurate to how prepared they are. We can save them time and money and protect our members as well. That's the goal, is to be accommodating to the developers while not risking the membership. That's what this plan does. That's what these 4 documents, when placed together, do. So do you have any questions or any thoughts or feedback on this process so far?
I guess I have one. Do we have any of these projects looking at us right now?
We've had a few, what I'm going to call preliminary. They may think they're more than preliminary. I would characterize the few we've had as very, very preliminary. It has not gone past phase 1. We have been able to identify they're not serious yet,
Okay.
but they're in the right place. If one of these does materialize due to the scope and the scale, the many megawatts it would be, it would, as I referred to earlier, have a significant impact on our capital plan, budgets, and things like that. So if it's bigger than our bread box, I will have to bring it back here one way or the other, because you're going to need to see financing, funding in these agreements, and the protections for the membership. So when we get a serious one, you're definitely going to see it pretty quickly. But so far, I would characterize them as casual inquiries.
Would we actually want one of those located here? Would it be good for us?
So it's a tough question. It kind of depends. And so there's a lot of local cities and counties that weigh in on what type of data center it is and their local zoning and things. I'm going to stay out of that aspect of it because that's a local government thing as far as what they like and don't like in their community. From an electric cooperative perspective, if we handle the four guardrails we talked about well, we should be very indifferent. We should be accommodating but indifferent because we're doing it in such a way that protects the membership so they don't take a fall financially. And if we're doing that, then we're giving it to them at cost and with risk pricing. So we're not going to make a lot of money, but we're not going to lose any money. So I'm not excited, nor am I concerned about it potentially coming here either way.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you think an NDA, or did the team consider an NDA as part of any of the process, but especially like even step one, few of those fields seem like it may make some people nervous to
We have
overshare.
Right, we have actually already executed an NDA with one that I would still say was casual. There's an NDA embedded in phase one. Once they get to a legal aspect, if it's just, we're curious and it's hypotheticals, there's not a lot to share. But once it gets down to specifics and sites where we're exposing part of our infrastructure, there are legal requirements to protect that data and confidentiality for our membership.
Should we have one that will draft that way? We don't have a variety of NDA languages to manage what we,
Already happened.
okay, and you said you do. And then do we have an existing tariff that covers these kinds of loads, or would the majority of them get kind of a custom tariff?
So the way Tri-County's tariff has historically worked, anything over a certain size is at contract and it defers to the contract. So this is structured the same way. What's unique so far about this is the scale of these. You'll go back and look at that first document where we talked about the scalability. Depending on how big they are, determines how much money they need to give for studies. Because a study for a 2 megawatt load will be different than a 200 megawatt load, right? So we put some scalability in there, and that's by size. But there's other unique characteristics that we won't really know until we get, I'll say, past first base with one of them. It's possible it could be big and quick and simple. It's possible it could be small and detailed and really drag out for a long period of time, but it would depend on the contract, which again, I will defer back to because of the scale and the size of these. You're definitely going to see it in our 5-year plan because I'm going to have to explain where all these many millions of dollars coming from and going to. So it would be a unique part of that plan that's called out very explicitly for the work plan going forward.
So I know in some of our areas, we do have dual certification, so would we let something like this go to an investor-owned utility, or would we compete and try to get it? I mean, I'm asking the question because I don't know.
It's a great question.
We don't have dual service where I live, so.
And it depends. So the way I'm going to frame this, and then there's different applications. The way I'm going to frame it is if we do all 4 guardrails, we're neither going to be too excited or too sad if we win or lose, because I don't know what winning and losing is. If they won't do it this way, they're not safeguarding the membership. Getting back to the dual certification part of our service territory, the IOUs may want it or they may not. They get that luxury, and that's fine for their business model. Given that we've already built a system over 87 years in infrastructure, we have the obligation. So if they choose to come in our territory, we have to serve, they have to fill out the application. So I don't know that we'd be happy or sad. We will happily serve them if they complete all the requirements. I don't know that it's going to be a good or a bad thing for us as long as we do all 4 steps. If we ever got lazy or shortcut the steps, I would be very concerned. But honestly, many of these are going towards co-op territories anyway because of the real estate aspect. And many of the largest co-ops in the nation are adjacent to a large city. And so you're starting to see a trend here. Co-ops are getting very, very familiar with these because of what you're talking about, that concept in Texas in particular. And Texas is definitely one of the hottest states for potential data centers. I think Virginia is right there with them neck and neck, but Texas and Virginia are just killing it with data center applications. So I think there will be more to come in the coming months. But I wanted to get this framework in front of all of you just to show you the transparency of what we intend to do. Because this is so much money, even though you're going to see, if one shows up, you're going to see it in the work plan. It's going to take years to build. It's going to work through the budget multiple times, probably because of the time to order these things. Because it is so many dollars, I would request a board vote on this topic, because it does, kind of like Margaret referred to, fits right there next to the tariff involving money going back and forth in large amounts. So that would be my request if the board doesn't have any additional questions. I'd submit for a vote, please.
Okay, so we have a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the 4 documents associated with large load potentials, as presented.
Okay, do we have a second? So Dawn will second, and all of those in favor, any more discussion? Okay, all those in favor? So motion carries 4-0.
Appreciate that. So Chair, with your permission, the next item on the agenda relates to the Credentials and Election Committee Guidebook. And I'll kind of kick this off with a little bit of framing. Tonight, this is about finishing what you asked for as far as a cleaner, perhaps more transparent and defensible election process. What you're seeing today is also alignment across 4 pieces. So there's a little bit of similarity here. In the last topic, we talked about 4 documents and how they worked together for an end goal. I'm going to do the same thing here as far as the baseball analogy and say there's 4 components to this to keep from flipping back and forth across documents that were in your inbox a few weeks ago. But those 4 components are part of this system that are, again, in your board pack for this month, but they work together. It's the bylaws, the committee structure, policy, and communications. So we could spend a few minutes talking about each of those areas and how that can work together to accomplish the desired goal. I'll start briefly with what was, and then we'll get into those 4 pieces. What was historically was just a committee structure that was tied to a district-based appointments and the timing of director election, that cycle. It may have been perceived as less consistent in documentational expectations, perhaps. Again, this is perception, and so just that clarity or the perceived risk of influence or potential inconsistency, that could be perceived with what the process did look like. But as we shift to what is being presented and proposed and what's been discussed, let's talk about now the 4 documents that you've got in your possession. And this is going to be a move towards more structure, more independence, and a policy-driven approach. I'm going to take a few seconds and talk about what it is now. It looks like it's an at-large committee-based application, so it's not by district. It's going to be a smaller, more focused group to allow them to meet with more agility, more flexibility. If a smaller group could potentially collaborate a little bit closer, a little bit more flexibility in calendar space. It's board selected based on qualifications, not geography, meaning I'll go back to the district framework. It's at large. And those terms will be staggered for continuity, just like you would expect from any other process like that. Most importantly, in this aspect, I'm going to emphasize this is a standardized process for every applicant for every process. What the board did earlier this year with a board guidebook, I'm going to use an analogy. The board guidebook put a lot of your information together in one place, a convenient source of a high percentage of truth. So too will the committee guidebook do a very comparable purpose for the committee. So they have one place to go for a very high percentage of the truth. Now, obviously the board writes the committee guidebook in your board packet, but this guidebook grounds the committee and it communicates expectations. It lets them know what they're walking into, what's expected of them before they get in those discussions. So they have a fair shot of being successful. It frames this as a neutral administrator. The committee is the administrator of the process. We'll talk about role clarity in just a moment. It's not an extension of individuals or individual committee members or individual board members. So that's what this is now going towards it. We'll talk about how the system works now in this proposal. And this is for members applying to serve on the elections committee, okay? I'm going to walk through 4 steps and how it works in this process. Step 1, this is key. The board sets the rules consistent with the bylaws, as has been the case. This is the bylaws and the election schedule. Both of those are prepared, reviewed in advance before any names and faces ever show up in applications. So the board sets an even playing field, and the timeline and the bylaws and the board owns setting the rules, okay? Step 2 is an open application process for the existing committee members and members to apply. There's a verification of eligibility. There's some background checks, legal things, making sure they're valid members, a few things like that that get run on their behalf. There's structured interviews. There's consistent evaluation criteria for every applicant and consistent interview questions for every applicant. There's another analogy coming on here, much like analogy-wise, in a hiring process, there's HR appropriate legal questions to ask or not ask, and how you do equity and fairness there. The same principles have been applied to this process. And as a result of that, the committee would nominate up to 3 candidates per district. Now that's the nomination. Nomination is a recommendation that says they not only, those candidates, met the criteria from legal, membership, etc., but the committee also recommends those candidates, up to 3 per district. If a member meets the minimum threshold of legalities, etc., they still got the petition route if they did not get nominated. So as long as they're past the legal backgrounds, all those things, financial, membership, etc., they can still apply via the petition process. So that's an open and inclusive process for all members. So they don't have to be nominated to get in the race on the ballot. What this does is it preserves members' rights while improving the process discipline and makes a very clear path for everybody before the process begins. So what I'd like to do now is transition to, well, how is this different? How is this different? And we'll start with role clarity. And I'm going to focus on 3 different individuals or sets of individuals. Board members set the policy. They set the policy and the rules. That's the timeline, the policy, the committee's got it. The board sets the rules. The committee administers the process. They do not get to create rules. They do not get to interpret the rules. The rules are set by the board, approved in advance, and applied evenly to everybody in the process. Any cooperative involvement or cooperative staff is merely as an administrative person to hand off information to the committee saying this person has passed the background checks, their membership is valid, etc. There will be no opinions given or received or offered. The cooperative staff has 0 involvement other than ensuring they have their technology and other things set up. So we're just administrative support. So the board sets the rules, the committee enforces the rules, cooperative sets it up for the committee and gets out of the way. It's important to note in this process that the same interview questions are used for everybody in that process. Same evaluation process, the same fairness, and the same documentation requirements. We talked a little bit about this in the previous committee orientation, and we talked about our insurance process. Our DO&M, directors, officers, managers policy, will cover a committee while they're doing these things. If they do these things faithfully, they stick to this guidance of these documents, they have legal protection and they have some insurance. To the extent that anybody gets outside of the normal rules for operating whatever it is, they may or may not. So this is a way for them to serve faithfully on this committee in good faith, knowing that they have some assurance and they have a lot of protection from that perspective. It also requires, it's kind of what it gives, it requires integrity and independence. And what I mean by that is strict confidentiality. Once you think about filling out an application, you're going to have somebody's going to have sensitive information there, what's called personal identifiable information, PII, which is all sorts of rules about protecting that. Think about the legal background checks that will be done on these people, criminal checks, financial checks, background checks, payment history checks, whatever it is. So there's going to be some sensitive information, and that has to be safeguarded reasonably, as a prudent person would do. There will be no public commentary or influence by committee members, lobbying for and against, etc. Their job is not to lobby for and against, it is to administer the rules that the board sets up. And finally, there'll be no candidate, no committee member, no board interference with the perception thereof. I think in many of these contexts and conversations, it's just as important to acknowledge the perception or the potential and eliminating as much of that as possible is best for everybody involved. This aligns to the board governance guidebook. So all those documents we talked about up front, You've already got this responsibility to establish the bylaws, to maintain the bylaws, to establish an election cycle, to maintain that election cycle. This fits consistently with that. So we've talked about what was, what's proposed, how that's different. I want to slow down a little bit to why this matters. And because I don't think doing something this big is worth it if we don't understand what we're trying to do and why we're trying to do it. So I came back to three reasons, three things that I think I've heard clearly is we'd like increased consistency. We'd like to make sure every future candidate will be treated the same every cycle. Fairly, any member that meets the minimum criteria is welcome to apply. Got to go through the same background checks, but we want that consistency in the future. We want to make sure it's a fair, level playing field for everybody going forward. Next, it's just as real, the perception risk. We want to do everything reasonably possible to minimize even the perception or the potential of favoritism or influence by any committee member or the committee itself, the cooperative, the board, a board member, employee, everything. We want to minimize that risk, eliminate it if at all possible. And third, I think this is important for everybody involved. Legal and governance risk for every individual and for every group, for every board member, for every committee member, for the board, for the committee, for the cooperative. We want to make sure we're aligned, it's defensible, it's repeatable. And it's a process that's very systematic and it's documented with the rules published in advance up front on the website and made sure to be provided to everybody at the time of their application. Bottom line is this process and all these documents together, they provide evidence and it's protection of credibility for the election, for the board, committee, and the cooperative. That's the why I think what we've got here does those three things and some others, but those are three of the best things of this transition. So when you think about a transition, I don't care how good the plan is, if the communication is not at least adequate, it's probably not going to be very successful, right? So as we thought about the communication and what members will see, we've outlined for you some drafts of a very clear message that's more open, it's more accessible, and it's more representative of the entire membership versus local district rolling participation. It's open access, it's open application for the process for the committee. And it reinforces that governance belongs to the membership and that you as a board are certainly taking good faith efforts to be diligent with that to ensure that's consistent going forward. So tonight, what I'm asking for from the board is I'm acknowledging first, it's not conceptual, this is completion. The time is a little bit sensitive given what we have for the remainder of the year. And if this change is desired by the board, implementation would begin next week with notification to committee members first and then outward to membership. There's some draft communication in your board materials. So what I'm asking for tonight, I believe what you've asked for is a process that's fair, that's consistent and defensible. And I think what you have delivers that. It does it in a way that protects the membership, protects the individuals, and it aligns the membership and the board going forward. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to try to respond to those. I'm afraid most of what's been discussed is in those materials. I know it's dozens of pages and you guys are very busy. I don't want to read all that to you, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to try to take a note, respond, or whatever you prefer.
I think it needs to be done. I don't have any heartburn or questions at all.
I agree.
So hopefully this process produces good candidates, good solid candidates that are interested in helping move forward and is definitely representative of the membership, and that will be great. This is the structure and the process that could do that, but to do so, we'd need to move pretty efficiently before the 2026 election schedule comes up to make this effective with the communication and the scheduling that would need to happen after that.
So do we have a motion to approve?
I'll move.
The second,
I'll second.
okay, all those in favor? So motion carries 4-0.
Thank you. And so this month for our cyber training, we have 6 steps to protecting your digital privacy. Thank you guys for that. So along those lines, I am happy to share that the cooperative also participates in a program where we hire one of these companies that tries to come in and see what they can do and so forth. Well, our IT team is ramping up the fund this year. Instead of asking them to break in, see what they can do, we're opening the door and telling them, here's all the stuff. See if you can get in and tell us what you can do. Take this back to when I got here and we had a financial auditor come in and we gave them a laptop and complete access and said, here it is. Don't ask us to go find it for you. Go wherever you want to go. We're doing the same thing in IT because we want to see where we're most vulnerable. And if they're any good, and I know they are, they would be in this business if they couldn't find something. They're going to find some stuff we've got to work on. But I'd rather find it out this way than some other way, right? So we're doing that. I don't know when. I know it's very soon. I don't know who. I don't know how. I'm anxious to find out after the fact, like, well, what could they do? How far did they go? How far did they get? What stopped them? If that didn't stop them, what else was going to stop them? So a little nervous about it, but excited to see this is the first time we've opened it up this much. And so it's in the spirit of the same thing we do with the financial auditor of no holds, no room you can't go to. We're telling you the roadmap. Come get it. It may hurt, but it'll be good for us to learn and figure out what we've got to do to make it more strengthened. I don't think you can have enough cybersecurity. You can't have enough safety. We'll have as much as we can get. So that's in process. I suspect by the time we meet next month, I'll be able to include something in the report, letting you know how we did, what we learned, and where we've got to go from there. So for your part in that, especially as board members, I thank you for doing the 2FA. I know it's a hassle. I know what that will sound like. Ding. I get it, but I appreciate you setting a good example and safeguarding resources and assets. It's really comforting that I can meet new employees and tell them, hey, we all do this. And we're in this part together. There's no exceptions. I do it every time I get on my machine. The board does it. So thank you for setting that good example. And with that, that ends the cybersecurity training. If there are no questions, that's all the information I had prepared outside of the normal board packet.
Okay, so this concludes the open session portion of the meeting. Thank you for continuing to follow the progress of the cooperative. Have a nice evening.